Archie, I have a will. Do I really need to bother with beneficiaries?
Well, Jimmy, that depends. How worried are you about probate? I'm Archie Hoxton.
And I'm Rob Hoxton.
And this is Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. Welcome back to the Last Paycheck Podcast, brought to you by Hoxton Planning and Management. We're your hosts, Archie Hoxton and Jimmy Sutch. And today, we're going to kind of go back to basics and kind of in the estate planning category and talk about beneficiaries.
Very simple, but vital.
Yeah. Super, super important.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes overlooked. I would say maybe even often overlooked. Because often when you're opening an account or setting up, your 401k at a new job, it's one little question that you can breeze through. Sometimes you can just kind of skip over it even. But they're really, really important in if you end up needing them, which we all will one day.
Yeah, like we hear a lot about estate planning documents and getting them in order. And oftentimes you get those things in order to avoid probate. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can do this very simply by assigning beneficiaries.
Right.
And so a lot of the headache that people go through, whether there's no will that exists or a beneficiary isn't designated on an account, the whole probate conundrum could be avoided pretty easily.
Yeah, yeah. But I guess we should probably start with probate itself and kind of what it is and why one would want to avoid it.
The nightmare that is probate.
Yeah. So probate is essentially the legal process of settling an estate where, when someone passes away, all their stuff, whether an investment account, retirement plan, life insurance money, their house, their
pension
stuff, pension, their furniture, their cars, everything that you own, that you possess, needs to go somewhere, right? And it usually goes to family members or charities if you've set it up that way. But the probate process is determining who gets it. And
it's a pretty complex thing for somebody that hasn't done it before.
Right.
And if you're lucky, you don't do it often, right?
Right.
But some of these things could be like validating a will, right? If you're lucky enough to have the person that had passed away to have the will, right? It could be managing that person's assets if there are any trusts involved, right? You might become a trustee of some sort. I guess even paying debt and taxes. Yeah. And then finally, after all that, you kind of get to the point of distributing the assets. Right. And so it can be overwhelming for a lot of people.
Yeah. And it can be as down in the nitty gritty as going to someone's house and looking around for certain possessions or selling, having an estate sale. It can be a lot of work. So having everything that you can simplify and make quick and easy and go around the whole probate process, the more stuff that you can do that, the quicker, easier, less time consuming, less stressful that whole settling of your estate will be. And beneficiaries are one of the best ways to do it. But, some of the other things about probate that people don't like, we've talked about time consuming. It's also public. So it's out there. People can look at the assets that you have, the debts that you have. Creditors can see that and come, a knocking to get paid back on loans. And, there's expenses associated with it. You might need an attorney. There's all kinds of stuff. And then sometimes fights arise where people dispute how assets are distributed.
And we say time consuming, and the reason why the time consuming piece is sometimes so burdensome is because sometimes family members need quick access to your money. Right. If something were to happen to you, whether that's a spouse or not, but nonetheless, sometimes this process of probate can take a lot of time and require some patience, even though you don't have much time before you actually need or have obligations with that money that you're inheriting or whatever it may be.
Yeah. It also has its own set of guiding laws that if you don't have your wishes expressed in a valid way, and that kind of falls into the whole, whether it's a will or beneficiaries or whatever, there's its own set of laws called intestacy laws that determine who your next of kin is and how your assets will be distributed. So the state decides if you haven't properly expressed your wishes. So there's different approaches to this, but beneficiaries, I would say, are the easiest, quickest, least friction way to move certain types of assets where you want them after you die.
Very easy. Very easy.
So
go ahead.
I was going to say, kind of what falls into, what you can designate beneficiaries on.
Mm-hmm.
And the most obvious one that people think of would be like financial accounts. So let's say your 401k, start a new job, you're signing up for the 401k, you probably get a question that says, who do you want to name as your beneficiary?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you name your spouse.
If you're not married, you got to choose who you love more, whether it's your mom or dad, but
or sibling or whatever. Yeah. Or you leave it blank, which means that there is no automatic process to move that money to a specific person or entity. So,
and oftentimes the only time, to interrupt you, is the only time that's at the forefront of your mind is when you're enrolling.
Yeah.
Right? So you're enrolling, you're signing up for these benefits. Hey, I want to put in my 3% contribution into the 401k. And I also love my mom more than my dad.
Yeah.
And then it's out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
And oftentimes life events occur. Mm-hmm. Right. And people don't necessarily remember to update their beneficiaries.
Right.
And we've seen that quite a lot, especially with working with 401ks. Somebody might be on like husband or wife number 3 or 4, and husband or wife number 1 or 2 are listed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big problem. And it's a common problem. You see that a lot. Right.
And here, that's a great point. And here's the thing. You might have updated your will,
right,
and said, I want my current spouse to get everything. But if your 401k, this company you've been working for a long time, maybe you've got a nice nest egg in there, but you never updated the beneficiary from spouse number 1. Spouse number 1 is going to get that, and your new spouse isn't, because the beneficiary designation goes around the probate process. It
skips the will.
It skips,
essentially.
Yeah. So it is critically important.
Yes, it's vital.
Yeah.
So it is really common, I guess, to think about beneficiaries and assigning somebody as a beneficiary on qualified accounts, like even IRAs or 401ks or 403bs. Somewhere where it's less common to think about this would be like checking accounts or even taxable brokerage accounts.
Yeah.
So typically on the banking side, you'll have something called a POD, payable on death. So you control the account. That person, the beneficiary, can't get into the account or access the account.
Right.
But if something were to happen to you, it's very, very easily, they get an account opened, the assets transfer right to them.
Right.
And a TOD is similar.
Yeah, transfer on death. It's just different terminology, more commonly used for brokerage accounts where you have investments and it's, not non-IRA. Another place that you might see a transfer on death designation is in certain states, which you can Google which states allow it. They have what's called a transfer on death deed, which is for real estate. So like, let's say your primary residence, you want to go right to your child. And maybe you've titled the house joint tenants with rights of survivorship with your spouse. So let's say both you and your spouse die simultaneously and you don't have the transfer on death deed. It's determined by your will, or if you don't have a will, the intestacy laws in the probate court. But if you set up the transfer on death deed, it would go to whoever is listed there after it goes to the joint owner. But again, if you're married and you die simultaneously, it's like having a beneficiary designation for your house, which makes planning, again, much more convenient for a very large asset that can be kind of difficult to deal with.
Right.
So there's a lot of ways that you can do it. And other types of property that you can name beneficiaries would be life insurance, which if you're buying a life insurance policy, probably not going to skip this part. This is kind of the point. But having a beneficiary for your life insurance policy, also annuities, potentially a pension, things like that.
So, and if your mind does fray a little bit and you go dark on us, right? And you go to the next layer, right? There's even ways to put contingent beneficiaries on a lot of these accounts, whether it's a TOD account or an IRA or a 403B. You can kind of plan a little bit for the future and much more simply than a trust document or a will, and completely skip probate very easily.
Yeah, and when you name a contingent beneficiary, what you're basically doing is, if my primary beneficiary dies before I do, this is the person that's next in line, and then they get it. Because again, beneficiaries are one of those things that you could go a long time without checking. So if you know who you would want to be next in line, and then you go years without checking, and your primary beneficiary passes away and it doesn't occur to you, that next in line person is going to get it. And you can structure them all kinds of creative ways. I mean, there's different types. There's per stirpes and per capita, which determines how it kind of passes through generations. Should different people predecease others? We won't get into that right now because that's kind of a big topic, but there are creative ways to make sure that your wishes are met without the hassle of probate.
Yeah, I will say, kind of sticking on this point of outdated beneficiaries, which we see often, we see that a lot with folks who have left an employer, right? So when they got hired up the street at ABC company and they got enrolled into their 401k, they listed whomever as their beneficiary. They had left that company and then moved onto another new employer. Right. And so you often see, and Archie and I see this all the time, especially as we move assets and consolidate assets. Well, we'll go back out and get that statement from a 401k that's 12 years old, but still meaningful, but just old. And it will just have outdated beneficiaries. So if you are a person that job jumps, you just want to make sure that those old 401ks that you had in the past have the right beneficiaries.
Yeah. And there's a good argument to be had for, consolidating and not having too many accounts. On one hand, often you think, well, I want to be consolidated so that I don't have, investments all over the place that aren't getting the right amount of attention. I'm not reviewing them frequently. I'm not rebalancing. I'm not, just taking good care of them. So there's that. There's the more consolidated that you keep your finances, the better you will be at managing the investments, but also, and maybe even more importantly, it's going to be way easier to keep your beneficiaries squared away so that when you do a periodic review of your beneficiaries, you don't have to review 10 accounts. Maybe you only have to review 4 or 5.
And also on the beneficiary side, somebody that's worried about this stuff is typically worried about the person inheriting it. Right. So in terms of the ease of access to the funds, if that beneficiary only has to approach 2 accounts instead of 7 accounts, or 2 vendors instead of 7 vendors, it makes the ease and the transition a lot easier too.
Yeah. Consolidation, organization, having a good estate plan. And then this is also probably one of the most basic parts of an estate plan is having beneficiaries named properly. But it is not the only part. Having a will in place is important for other reasons maybe you're not as concerned about the will directing assets, but the will appoints an executor, right? You want someone that you can really trust to settle the estate. If you have young children, the will appoints a guardian.
Within that, there's also, medical power of attorneys or medical directives, which are critical if something were to happen to you.
So this isn't to say that you should only have this. You should have a full estate plan and speak to an attorney about constructing a complete and rock solid estate plan. But this is one of the simplest and
but if you are
ways.
If you are like a lot of people that we work with, and you kind of realize and know and understand you should make that appointment with an attorney, but you kind of kick and defer it, for the next 5 or 10 years, at the very least.
Yeah, don't defer this.
Yeah, at the very least, go ahead and make sure you assign the appropriate beneficiaries to the accounts.
Yeah, I would say maybe it takes 5 minutes per account, depending on the provider. And I go and I'll update mine, and it takes me maybe 5 minutes. Of course, you don't have to do it very often, but.
Well, Archie's, has this growing family that's growing every couple of years, so he has to add some contingents.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I do have to update periodically. So, and we all do. But yeah, and I would say, if you're checking every couple or 3 years, or major life event, if you get divorced, if you get married, if you get remarried, if you have a child, if you update your estate plan and you have a trust, these are all reasons to review and check. But I would say at minimum, if you do it every 2 or 3 years, and keep consolidated, you'll be all set. We hope this was useful. This is about all the time we had. This is another one of those topics that we could probably keep rambling on for a while about. But remember, leave us a comment if you have questions or thoughts about today's episode. Subscribe to the channel. We love having regular listeners. Like the video, share it with your family and friends. Hit the bell for notifications so you know when we create new content.
And if you do have any topics you'd like to hear us talk about, let us know.
Yeah, we're always looking for input from you all. So, yeah, well, we hope you enjoyed it, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. You've been watching Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. If you like this show, be sure to hit like and subscribe. Last Paycheck is available anywhere you get your podcasts.